Well, hello, and welcome to Story Sessions, where your story matters. I'm your host, Laura Lynn Donahue, and each week we gather for meaningful conversations rooted in lived experience. Let's dive in. Today, I sit down with a good friend, decades-long friend, Phil Madeira. He is a friend of both mine and my husband Don's, and Phil is an author, he's a songwriter, he's a musician, and he is a multifaceted, multi-awarded individual. I look forward to your getting to hear my talk with him. Phil is very conversational and has a lot of stories to tell. He especially is talking about his upcoming memoir, which will be out in the fall, and it is called Summer of Gone. And we'll explore more about that title in our interview and how it came about. And we'll also talk about his project on Kickstarter called The Millionth Mile. Lots more to come. Can't wait for you to hear it. Let's dive in. Welcome, Phil. All right, we are on. Phil, welcome. I'm so glad to have you. Have been wanting to have you on the podcast, and today worked out. I know we've been a little slow on the uptake, but here we are. And thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah. Honored.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So we have so much that we can talk about. What I would love for you to do, if you would, is to talk to our listeners, our audience, and tell them who you are. And I don't mean your accolades, because you've got lots of them. We'll get to those. But who are you right now? What are you doing?
Well, I'm going to turn 74, believe it or not, next month. And I am a person who essentially I've always had a dream of, making my music, doing my music. That takes a lot of space in my head. But for me, my journey of pursuing a dream entailed, goodness, 35 or 40 years of supporting other people in their dream and in their careers, music careers. And I think the most notable of those people would be Emmylou Harris, who I've been with for I think 18 years. But at some point I realized, okay, you came to Nashville from Rhode Island with a dream of making your own music, and you've spent your life making other people's music and or making other people's versions of my music. And I say this with great gratitude for those years, because I was never ready to do the thing that I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years, which is making my music as I continue to support other artists. But really,
Just for a second.
sure.
What do you mean you were never ready? What do you mean by you were never
I
ready to do what?
mean, I mean that I in believe in 1986, I signed a very simple record deal with a little gospel label here in Nashville, and I made a record that uh that I look when I've had the occasion to listen to that old work, I'm hearing the sound of someone who's really trying to please a record label, who's really trying to fit a market, and I hear it in the way I sing. And it just kind of makes me sad for that guy. So when they offered me an opportunity to do it again, I declined. And I'm not sure why I declined, but I'm glad I did. And eventually I got out of that particular genre into the Americana thing, into more roots based reality music. And that was where I belonged. So when I'm glad that I took all those years off. Nobody remembers the record that I made in 1986, and I'm glad for that, because I really love all the records I've made as an independent artist since I think the first one was in 95 and maybe the second was in 97. And then I took 10 years off, and just kept working for other people. But of course, who you are is not what you do, as you well know. But I've always been a creative, always been painting or writing prose or making music. And of course, the prose turned into my first book back in 2000. 13 called God on the Rocks. And I had just been writing, I'd just been writing almost like little essays, kind of biographical essays. And a publisher found that and gave me a ridiculous advance, which got me out of debt. And of course,
Remember those days.
uh, yeah, they don't come now, as you and I both well know. But
Yes.
and then and then I didn't write for a while after that until I had a thing happen to me, which there were some tragic. I can't even call them consequences. They were really someone else's consequences, which affected my life, and I knew I needed to write about that death and
Mm,
betrayal and lost love or the idea of love. And I wrote about 135 pages and threw it out. It was just so
mm,
self-serving.
mm,
And then a few years later, I revisited the idea with a real, more redemptive viewpoint and gratitude about what I had gone through in those years. And and that's the book that has brought you and I together today, and
yes.
that's called Summer of Gone, and that will come out in a few months. But it really traces a person going through a tragedy on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm on tour with Emmylou Harris. I'm
Okay.
playing music with my closest friends. So as this
Wow.
tragedy is happening, I'm trying to balance that and be a good boyfriend or whatever. On the other hand, I'm happy as a clam. I felt like, and you know how this is, you write a book and then you decide, gosh, I don't know if anybody really needs this. Maybe I just needed to write it and I can live with that. But with this new book, it ties in with my music and everything I do, honestly, musically and writing wise, it's all inspired by whatever moment I'm in. If I'm in a moment of tragedy, I'm going to write about it. If I have some event in my life that's unpleasant, first thing I'm going to do is write a song about it. And it may never get heard, or it may, but I rarely write out of, well, even fiction. They say the best fiction really comes from the reality that
Yeah.
you're experiencing. So,
Yes. Yeah. So you tell us a little bit about where the title of your book came from, because it's in my opinion it's poetic.
well, thank you. It's funny, but the person whom I was in a very long-term relationship with had found out that she had cancer, and our relationship it was definitely on the, on the downslide, or however you'd want it. It was on the decline, and I think we were both trying to figure out how to save it. But at some point, I was asked by Keb Mo, the famous blues artist, to go on tour with him. I'd written some songs for him and played on his records. And he was going out with Taj Mahal, who is one of my childhood idols, whose records I've also played on. So it was like, I can't wait to do this. And I got that call, and it was actually before we found out that this other main figure in the book was terminally ill. And I said, well, it's a 14-week tour. And her reply was, Summer of Gone. And I just logged that away. And so it's really her poetic mind and that's the interesting thing, by the way,
Yeah.
parentheses, about relationships, even the ones that are sour, is that if you're a wise person, which apparently occasionally I am, you will have these little, you will realize, hey, somebody just gave you a gift. And in this epic story, I was really given the gift of pain, but it just has benefited me in so many ways. So I think the book's encouraging. But yeah, Summer of Gone, that was just her spitting out her unhappiness that I'd be on this tour. And as it turned out, I canceled that tour once I found out that there was this uh, impending death coming. I wasn't sure how long that was going to last. So I canceled that tour. And then Emmy Lou called and said, I want to crank the band up. We'll be out for 6 weeks. And I thought, well, I can't stop working. And it was a blessing because Emmy and that band, Red Dirt Boys, they're like family to me. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well,
Summer
I
of
love that
Gone. I
support.
didn't write the title.
Summer of Gone. Well, Well, it's very good, but in contrast comparison to God on the Rocks, I mean, they're both lean memoir. They're both memoir, but just different stages of your life. God on the
Yeah, and
Rocks.
it's almost funny. It's funny. God on the Rocks, I really thought, well, what am I going to write about after that? And God on the Rocks was just me not telling a story, but telling a number of stories just as things occurred to me.
Yeah.
I was almost given a writing prompt just out of the blue every time I sat down to write. So one day I might write about my terrible, terrible relationship as a 4-year-old with my grandmother, or the grand monster, as the book calls her.
Oh,
But the next chapter, I might be talking about my father, or it was just any number of things. But if you read one chapter and that's all you ever read, you actually got kind of a full thought, something to walk away with. Whereas Summer of Gone is really focused on a particular time and how those events inspired a few albums. And in fact, I was writing the first of those records, called Providence, before we knew illness was coming. And she did not like that record. It was about growing up in Rhode Island. She was like, "Well, why don't you just move back there?" And
yeah.
yeah, it was real weird. And so by the time of her death, I'm getting ready to mix the record. But that's an interesting trajectory of these two paths crossing. One being me just ascending musically to probably the greatest height of that time. I was just like I had my game. By the same token, I'm feeling torn between, are we losing this thing? And
You mean your
one of the things,
relationship?
I don't know that yes. And one of the
Yeah.
things that has occurred to me is just how often a person, and I don't think I state this in the book, I don't think it needs to be stated, but it's interesting to me how the illness of a person, the terminal illness of someone, oftentimes can tell you a lot about that person, because you and I can both think right off the top of our head. We can each, I'm sure, think of someone whose departure, that journey of departure from this sphere to whatever's next, was beautiful, where they gathered people around them. I can think of a friend right now who, gosh, man, when she was passing, it was just such an honor to get to visit with her. But yet other people in their journey out can really reveal a great bitterness, and in the case of the story I've written, almost a will to punish everyone who gets to keep living. So yeah, it's a heavy book, but it's also funny, and because, as you know, I do like humor, so I don't shy away from anything that's funny or whatever. It's not a downer. I think in the end it's pretty up. And it's also honoring of this person, because now the first time I wrote about it was like, she did this, she did that. The
Sure.
second
Yes.
time I
Yes.
wrote you know, but the second time
um,
I wrote it, I didn't have an axe to grind. Enough time had elapsed that I was so grateful for the present in which I live, that I was able to look back at this really terrible situation and remember what was good, remember the gifts that I received from it, including the title of the book, and in that way write, such a way that I don't want a person to read that book and not like the person we'll call my nemesis in the book. I don't even know if that's a correct term for it. I don't want anybody to look and say, wow, I really don't like that person. I want
yeah.
the humanity of each of us with all our flaws to be embraced.
Yeah. And I would think, obviously, I haven't read the book, it's not out yet. But when I wrote my memoir, I had a similar experience where I wrote, and there was a lot of anger. This happened, and, I'm writing down and pointing fingers, and then going back and reframing it in the context of, okay, wait, who was I at that time? Not what was someone doing to me or what was someone else feeling, but where's my part of the story, and what was going on, even if I didn't know it at the
Right.
time. The reflection is where you should be able to glean the wisdom, and it's what I think.
Right. You don't know. You have to remember, oh, so 10 years ago, maybe I was maybe I was more of a button pusher than I am now, and just sometimes those things that we're perceiving, I'm just repeating what you just said. Yeah, seeing who you were it takes a will to actually see, when you think of any broken relationship you've had or you have, sometimes mercy will allow you to see that, that you've contributed. It's like getting a divorce, when my wife and I got divorced, gosh man, everything in my mind, everything wrong was her. And of
Mm.
course, 20 years later, we have a fabulous post-divorce friendship. She texted me after Christmas a couple of years ago when actually she was going through cancer, which she thankfully has beat. But, our family dinner, I had her come over. I said, don't Christmas, and we had never done Christmas Day together since our divorce. But I always say, come over here. Our kids came. My girlfriend Jenny came, and they're very close, thankfully.
Right.
And at the end of the night, I get a text from Eleanor saying, I love our family. So, so to be able to look back and say, oh, wow, we both put up with stuff that, and then you realize you're just children. You look back 10 years and you see yourself as a child.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're not learning from those experiences, then they're not really worth having because you've got to grow. And I think just
True. Or
recognizing,
history will repeat.
yeah, absolutely. Yes, all about breaking patterns. But, I want to go back to just to briefly to something you said about Providence and
Hmm.
your partner at the time didn't like that. Tell me more about what was the dynamic there? What was going on?
It's so interesting. And I do, of course, I write quite a bit about this in fact, the book pretty much starts with me working on this record that I'm excited about. But I would always play her a song I was working on. I was always excited about it, and I assumed she was excited about it. I think often she was. But I had gone over there one day with a work tape of one of the songs, and this record, which I believe is 10 songs, is I had been playing a show up in Newport, Rhode Island, and my show was concurrent to the Newport Jazz Festival, and I had a dear friend, John Schofield, he is one of the top, probably three, jazz guitar players in the world. And we've become friends. So we managed to get breakfast together, and then I caught his show. But I was driving across what's known as the Newport Bridge, which connects one side of the little state of Rhode Island to the other. And I looked north, and all I saw was blue water, blue sky, green land. And when I left Rhode Island for Nashville, I shook the dust off my feet because I couldn't have a music career there. So I didn't want to know. So driving across this bridge, I was like, man, I just knew I had to write a record about Rhode Island. So in the process of writing these songs and talking to my partner about them, I was just so excited about it. And she had always been very supportive of my previous work, some of which she would lend a hand to lyrically, not a ton of it, but some of it. And so I don't know what the deal was, but I played her one of these songs, back in the Ocean State or something like that. And she just said, well, if you love it so much, why don't you move back? And I remember saying, well, why would I do that? I said, you're here. My daughters are here. Why would I, I'm just saying I love it up there. I'm not saying I need to be there. But that was a real, of course, when one reads that book, they will see many remarks like this that I just took on the chin and didn't argue with. And a lot of those things uh, were things that I refused to see as red flags. Another typical thing in any of us who are in failed relationships, we may be the red flag. I don't know, but in this case, I had plenty of flags to say, man, you don't really have this person's heart. They're not crazy about you, or why would they say this stuff? But I plowed through. Eternal optimist, 7 on the Enneagram. It's going to be great, and I would plow through. But yeah, so by the time I was, this is funny, Laurelyn. The night that I record, the 2 days that I spent recording that record before overdubs, I went in just vocals, piano, bass, and drums at Sound Emporium. And I had done a day of recording. I had one more day. And then I got home that night and I was bothered that this person, I thought, well, maybe it's that she doesn't feel included because I'm writing about a place 1,000 miles away, and so I wound up writing a song called Dearest Companion, and it was just contrasting, Yankee, Southerner, and it was kind of cute. But I desperately I realized I need to include her. So I tossed a song out, went in, recorded this song. I thought she'd be thrilled. But it's a lot of tongue-in-cheek stuff. And there's a line in this song about, I don't know, I can't even remember the exact line, but it's like your name's at the top in my little black book or something like this. And I sent her the lyric. I'm recording. I know she is very ill, and I wasn't allowed to speak of this to anybody, so that was another terrible thing. But anyway, I'm thinking this will cheer her up. So I sent her this lyric. And then on my way home from Sound Emporium, I popped in at her home and she looked at me and she said, "Little black book." and, and I said, "What?" I go, "What?" She goes, "Little black book." I go, and she said, "I didn't know you had a little black book." I said, "I had a little black book in the third grade. I don't have one now." I said, and it's so interesting that you asked me about her relationship with the Providence album, because that moment when she refuted this gift I had given her, I realized, wow, I actually can never give her anything without a caveat in which there's something wrong with the gift. The other example was right before we found out she was ill, I flew her and myself to London first class. And as we're taking off, and when we're lucky enough to be in first class, that whole ritual, you get the little glass of wine and you feel like, better than everybody in coach where you usually are. Well, she so we get our glasses of wine, and I raise a glass to her, and she goes, "I know you're only taking me here because you want to go here." And so these little things happen, they would happen quite often. And I think you know me well enough, certainly Don does, that for me to stifle a feeling it's not my natural inclination. But in that situation, I was constantly on eggshells, constantly taking it on the chin. And, I remember after sending her that lyric, I never played her the song. I never played her any of the recording. I just I think I really did, probably was trying to figure out my way out. How do I get out of this thing? And of
Yeah.
course, I, I didn't have to search hard.
Yeah. Well, you also were given the gift of providence in more than one
Yes,
way.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that didn't, oh, I see where you're going. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the title of that record really is a slight acknowledgement. I mean, I've thought, wow, what a beautiful name. I mean, I love Rhode Island. I love Providence, but what an amazing name to put on a place. And I read the history of Roger Williams, the founder of Providence, and he was kicked out of Massachusetts because he was trying to include people. He was inclusive. So he's a good old liberal like me and you. I don't want to speak for you, but anyway, but to have come from a place that said, "Oh, I know you are. I'm teasing," but to come from a place that at the outset was trying to welcome everyone. It's fascinating. So yeah, the word Providence is great, and little did I know where it was all taking me.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and earlier you also talked about mercy, which made me think of the Mercyland project that you have and the services that you provide. Tell the audience a little bit about that. I think maybe that was the first Kickstarter of yours that I contributed to way
You
back.
know, that was the first that my first Kickstarter was the first Mercyland record, and thank you, by the
Okay.
way. Um, and but the Mercyland recordings, there are three. I've done two volumes and then a Christmas volume. And
Mm-hmm.
they essentially, I had spent a lot of time in the Christian music world. And it really, even though it gave me some of my greatest friends and it gave me some really tremendous musical opportunities, it also was a place where I realized, okay, I've hit the ceiling here in terms of, I might love Jesus, but I don't want to just sing about Jesus, and I can't imagine him wanting me to either. I would like to think that uh, this being is interested in hearing something apart from a praise song, but that's just my imagination. Anyway, I was on tour with Emmylou, my very first year with her, 2008, and we were watching different people campaigning for president. It was going to be Obama and McCain.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the TV on the bus, and there was some really horrible TV preacher on there, I believe, named John Hagee. I don't mind using his name. Just terrible, talking about just trash about other people who didn't believe as he did. And McCain had him on board, thinking, oh, I guess he's a guy to get the Christians on my side. Well, he was not, it wasn't helpful. And then McCain had to let him go. So we're watching this on the TV, and it just occurred to me, man, I grew up and still believe not everything I grew up with, but I believe a lot of it. And none of it was hateful and exclusive and rotten. And at that point, I knew I needed to do something. And I went to Emmy. And here, at the point I went to her, I'd probably been playing with her for a year. And I said, I want to do like a gospel record, but it's not a Christian music record. I just want to do a record about, what if God is love? What if we just start there? And, if I start under the presupposition that God is love, then I'm going to feel differently about hell. I'm going to feel differently about who I can kill, who I can hate. And so she loved the idea, and so I enlisted some great artists, including John Schofield, who I previously mentioned.
Uh-huh.
But I had Buddy Miller and the Civil Wars, and look,
Oh,
right
yeah.
there is from the Civil Wars version of "From This Valley." From This Valley, their big song
Oh.
was written with me for the first Mercyland record,
Oh,
and that
yes.
so.
Yes. I remember that now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and they were little known at the time. And then, but when you mentioned that Mercyland blanket, so it is these projects I occasionally do, but honestly, it's turned into a songwriting workshop. I'm
Mm-hmm.
about to go to Ireland, which is probably why I'm wearing this hat,
Oh,
to do my fourth annual Mercyland in Ireland, and then this summer I'll do, gosh, 18th Mercyland in America. And these songwriting workshops are great because they're completely cooperative. You're co-writing, and of course I have good people involved. Steve Hindalong, Will Kimbrough, Cindy
mm-hmm.
Morgan will be my
Yeah.
fellow workers. And so people get an opportunity to write with some bona fide hit writers. But what happens is they're opening, in order to write a great song, they have to open their hearts. And so I have unwittingly created this beautiful community of people. And that's not what I was looking to do. I just was trying to find another thing to do. And yet here's this community of people who care for each other and stay in touch. So it's great. It's gratifying.
Yeah. Well, you said, not expecting to, but opening your heart, the songwriters, when they're together, I feel like you can't tell a good story unless you open your heart. I mean, you might tell an interesting story, but the story that's going to connect is going to be the story where you opened your heart, because that would let someone in.
I agree. I agree. At least certainly with memoir,
Yes,
because
yes.
we can read that pious, accolade-filled memoir of, and then I did this, or we can witness the suffering of someone living a real life. And of course,
Hmm.
we hope for victory or small victories in this journey that, we're only here for however long we're here for. But I totally agree with you. And that's why I think the memoir, like somebody like Anne Lamott writing, reading her what was that book?
Bird by bird.
The big
Oh,
not Bird by Bird, which is also a great book,
yeah.
but I forget. It's the one where she talks about her faith, and but man, she is just spilling her own blood. She's just,
Hmm.
not protecting herself, and she's neither is she really protecting anybody else. Which she says if you're going to tell your story, you kind of you got to tell the truth. So writing memoir is risky, and everyone in your family, I'm sure, has said to you the same thing that's been said to me. I don't remember it exactly this way.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Well, in what you mentioned about Anne Lamott, I just recently was writing that quote down, and I can't remember it verbatim, but the idea was if you're going to tell a story, you're going to tell all of the parts of the story, which will include the people who participated in the story. And it's on the people who participated in the story to own their story because you're going to tell it the way you remember it, but they were there and they have to
right.
own it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, she was
it's,
pretty much that quote. I wish I had the quote in front of me, but we're
yeah.
talking about the same exact quote.
By tuning into this podcast, you understand one thing. Everyone has a story to tell, and that includes you. But sometimes we need a little help to bring our story into the world. That's where Story Sessions comes in. We're a collective of published authors, editors, and experienced storytellers who know that great stories aren't manufactured, they're revealed. Through thoughtful listening, guided conversations, and respect for your voice, we help uncover the story that is already inside you. Story Sessions. Your story told the way it was meant to be. Find out more at storysessions.live.
Let's segue from that with with Mercyland. It was a Kickstarter project. They were albums. Now they've morphed into these beautiful songwriter workshops where relationships are developing. With that and with the Kickstarter, I'm sure that relationships have developed because of your
Oh
work.
yeah. It's interesting when I was initially doing the workshops, I was not co-writing with people. I would give them a prompt and turn them loose to co-write together. And it was successful enough that people wanted to keep coming back. But the year that I brought in Cindy Morgan and Will Kimbrough,
Mm.
Cindy being the great singer and also phenomenal author that she is, Will being an amazing guitar player and singer and songwriter. I kind of retooled how I looked at Mercyland, and I wanted to make sure at that time that every one of, let's say, 20 people who showed up, that every one of them would co-write at least one time with one of the three professionals. And that really was a great instinct. Well, what's wild is that over these last few years, I've wound up, like I put a record out last year called Falcon, which was the name of the car that took me off to all my adventures when I was a kid. There are two songs on Falcon that I co-wrote with people at Mercyland.
Mm.
That either says that I'm well, basically I'm trying to say it with humility. It's like, look, as much as I might love a person, as much as I might want that person to come back and put down their $1,300 and come to Mercyland again,
Mm-hmm.
I don't I don't like them enough to just cut an average song. So that
Yeah.
speaks to, the level of writing that happens uh, with some of these folks where, I'm not necessarily cutting the song Cindy and I wrote. I'm cutting the song that Bob and Lucas and I wrote. And so that's a real bonus for them because they're like, I can't believe it. I'm on a record that will sell 400 copies.
That's more
Yeah.
than mine would sell. I don't have one.
Well, you don't know, but so anyway, it's really gratifying for me. Also, I can think of probably five people from Mercyland who've decided to make their own records and that play out more often. And so to me, it's like it comes back to, why do you write, Laura Lynn? Why do I write? You have a need for our voices to be heard. And it's the same with anybody who comes to Mercyland, and they are really forced in a lot of ways because I give them in the morning time, I give a prompt which I know will make them search a place in their heart that might be difficult, except it's what they have to do for the next 15 minutes. You've got to do this thing, and everyone else is going to. So people will share stuff in that morning session, and they may be weeping, But to me, the good art, the good music, even my record, I have a record called Bliss. It's all about falling in love with Jenny Littleton and how wonderful it is to be loved by this woman. I still maintain that record came from the hard places before I even met her. So to me, all good art comes from some kind of suffering. So Mercyland gives people that opportunity to, the guy that's going through their breakup, it gives that person the opportunity to tell a room full of people that don't know him, I'm in this really painful place right now. All they're going to do is love on him, and two of those people are going to write with him, and they're going to write this song about the thing he needs to give wings to his voice to say, So it's gratifying work. I never would have dreamed that I would almost view it as an kind of an interesting calling, but I also look at it as giving back. I feel like, wow, look at the career I've been given. This is a way to help somebody else. And I've got folks in their 70s. I think last year I had an 80-year-old who was great, right down to, I think this summer, I think I've got a 16-year-old and her 18-year-old brother coming. It's like, great, here we go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as we know, living in Nashville, which was a small town, it's still small.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about songwriters, it's not uncommon for there to be a small pool of songwriters who just get used over and over again because an artist is comfortable with them or there's a good synergy between, three writers. But to be able to open up that circle, and I don't mean the circle of this particular three or that particular five, but to open up the circle in general of songwriting and offer an avenue for there to be more opportunities for stories to be told, whether they're on, Garth Brooks' album or, or whoever. That's not the point. It's just getting that opportunity to get it out, because I think that's part of the art of it is to be able to get it out and have someone hear it and appreciate it and be part of the experience of creating.
Well, I would think that you probably would agree with me that you writing your memoir, me writing mine, I wrote because I had to write. And I think that would be the same for you. I write songs because I have to write songs. I make records because I can, because I have to. And but my first consideration is not the audience for anything. My first consideration is, okay, I've got to do this thing. I might not be sure why, I might not know why. But then as I'm like with crafting a record, I may have cut 14 songs. I'm going to put 10 of them on a record. And part of that consideration at that point, I'm thinking, all right, what is the benefit of this thing that I had to write? What's the benefit for someone else to be hearing it now? And so with the Mercyland thing, most of these people are not going to make a record. Most of them are are there because they just want to have a voice. They want to sing. Not everybody has a big dream, but it's real interesting. Like the 80-year-old person that came last year, one of my favorite songs came out of a write with her and another professional musician who comes. He could probably be leading it as well, but he comes because it's a great thing for him. And we wrote this great song based on this 80-year-old woman whose husband had died a year and a half before, and every day she's thinking, I've got to wake up and take on the day. And of course, she's doing well if she's showing up at a songwriter workshop. She's taken on that day. But her story gave us a great song. I might record it someday. She never will, but just exercising your creative muscles. She might be like a painter or something, but somehow participating in this completely different media, I believe it all gives back. I believe, if I'm out on my back porch painting something, I believe that somehow that is filling the well that is going to give me a song or, a third book. God only knows. I can't imagine writing a third book right now, but I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine writing a second one after I was done with my first. But here
Yeah,
we are.
yeah.
So
Well, there's, I don't know if you ran into this or if you run into it, but I ran into the misconception that I didn't merit telling my story
oh
because I wasn't well known, that memoirs were written by people who were famous or other people really wanted to know about their lives. And I wrote, just like you said, for yourself. I wrote for myself because I had to write. I wanted to get it down. And then I wrote for my children, for posterity. And then I wrote for that one person who came up to me and said, that really made an impact on me. And that's what stories do when they're told from a deep sense of honesty and care and reflection and providing that connection. You don't have to be a famous celebrity. You don't have to be an influencer. As a matter of fact, those are probably the stories we can't relate to when you just boil it
yeah.
down. It's the heart. Just you said earlier, opening your heart and communicating your heart is important. And I know we have a mutual friend who has passed, John Mulder, who was one of the supporters for Mercyland and a big proponent, but also someone who loved story and gave of himself. And just share a little bit, if you don't mind, about that, just briefly, how that developed through communication between the two of you, how that came about, and then the relationship built.
I first heard I believe I had met John many years ago when he was living in Nashville. Well, he had told me that we had met, but I wasn't really clear on it. And then he had got in touch with me, I think in 2008 or nine. I was contacted by, I actually contacted a friend of his from Michigan. John was from Grand Rapids, and I knew this folk musician up there who thought he was dying of cancer. He certainly had cancer. And I just had this compulsion. I occasionally have these impulses that I feel like I have to pay attention to. I wish they weren't so expensive, however. But anyway, I had this impulse and I called this guy and I said, well, how's it look? And he said, not good. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Do you have, I think what I'd like to do is make a record on you, and I'm not going to charge you anything. And so we figured out how to ride the wave of chemo so that he could get down here, when he was feeling as best as he could. His name is, he's still living. His name is Ralston Bowles. But at some point in that process, I got a call from this guy, John Mulder. And in the process of making this individual's record, I had called people like Gordon Kennedy and Brian Owings, Emmylou's drummer, and I had about 30 musicians play for nothing. They'd each play on a track or something. They got the story. In fact, we were over at this guy, Ralston, and I went over to Wayne Kirkpatrick's, our close mutual friend. Don would have been there on this particular evening. And so I think Gordon was asking Ralston what he was doing there. And he said, well, Phil is helping me make a record. And Gordon offered to play on it. And that just turned into an idea. And I thought, well, what if I just get a bunch of people to play on one track for free? And so 33 Nashville musicians said yes, not even just Nashville. But anyway, so I get a call from John Mulder. He said, man, I'm just really touched by what you're doing. I said, oh, well, I just feel like I'm supposed to do it. And he said, well, I want to offer you $3,000 to help pay for this. Now I'm kicking myself now, but I said, no, I can't take that money, John. He said, well, why not? I said, well, because everybody's playing for free, including the mixer, including the mastering engineer. I said, if I take your money, then I'm not willing to do the thing I'm asking everybody else to do. So he got that. And anyway, then a few years later, when I did the first Mercyland record, one of the things on the Kickstarter was that you could pay to come and write a song with me. So John Mulder. That name comes up again. John Mulder comes. And then the next thing he knew, I had a songwriter workshop going. And this is, gosh, got to be 15 or 16 years ago. And the second annual Mercyland down in Florida, and John showed up. And, I still didn't know John. I had just written with him and I'd gotten that phone call from him. So I knew two things. I thought he seems like a really kind person, and he's probably got a good sized bank account because he's just willing to throw money over here. He's going to pay to come down to Florida for the workshop. And that's all I knew. At the workshop one evening, we had a bonfire on the beach and we had a few bottles of wine and whatever. And everyone was, everyone who wished to feel even better was feeling even better. And he started telling these stories about his work in hospice, and it was so touching to see this guy who was a real pioneer in the hospice movement, or I almost don't want to say industry, but. And so John endeared himself to that community, even in its infancy. And then a few years later, when I almost stopped doing it, I just had before I started doing it with Cindy and other people, when I was just carrying all this on my own, I had an incident where I found myself really exposed and didn't deal with it well. And I thought, I'm done. I am not going to do this again. And it was John Mulder and actually Cindy Morgan's husband, who they met at Mercyland. Anyway, those two guys said, you can't quit. And so I continued. But what's interesting is that John Mulder is in Summer of Gone because he was the hospice physician as things in that story started to go downhill. So John was an intimate friend. And in fact, the last time I talked to him, I was in Ireland, where I'll be next week, doing the workshop there. He was supposed to be at it. And the first morning of our workshop, we received word that he was failing. And so he had to cancel those plans. But I did drive up to his funeral, a few weeks after that. And I loved John. Beautiful, as you know, and those are the kinds of people that I'm meeting because I have a workshop like this. I have the opportunity to meet people I don't ever want to see again as well. It's very rare.
Well,
But once in a while, yeah, I mean, it's just how the world goes around. But once in a while, I meet somebody like a John Mulder whom everyone loved.
Every story moves through stages, and Story Sessions is built to meet you at each one. Start with a focused discovery session to uncover your story's arc, and then move into a guided series that sharpens your voice, your positioning, and your path forward. And when you're ready, step into launch with expert coaching to help your story land with clarity and impact. And sometimes When a story truly stands out, we don't just help guide it, we publish it. Find out where your story starts at storysessions.live.
We found each other again. Welcome back, Phil. And
Hey,
I'm glad that I didn't
I
lose you for
changed
good.
I changed the set because I had to come where I had a place to plug my phone in. That explains. You can see all this
Well,
crazy
yeah.
artwork I've got back here.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Nice.
Where were we?
Well, I wanted to segue from the Mercyland and the songwriting retreats, communities that you've done, into just touching again on the importance of storytelling. And part of the mission of this podcast is to get stories out there. And with that, we have a platform also called Story Sessions that gives the opportunity for people who wouldn't maybe necessarily tell their story the opportunity to do that. And
Right,
I just think that any opportunity out there that presents itself to get stories into the mainstream, there are so many stories worth telling. And too often, I believe people are hindered by saying, well, I'm not a writer, or I don't have the
right.
skills for that. But offering that experience through story sessions is something that I've been looking forward to, that I see as Mercyland correlates to that idea of getting stories out, is really the point that I was trying to make, maybe the long way around.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
just really
All about
appreciate
it's
that
all about
kindred
everyone's
spirit.
voice. Like we said earlier, everybody has a voice. And I think, part
Mhm.
of what might keep a person from telling their story is that they might not know that they have a story. We have the idea of what is a story? A story is something, it's got to be film worthy, or it's got to be, you got to fit it into 200 words, or, or
Yeah.
200 pages in a book or something.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you and I in our memoirs, we're actually just telling little stories. A lot of those memoirs are just, well, here's this little story. And hopefully the thread that needs to tie
Mm-hmm.
them together is durable. But I think for me, that is,
Yeah.
I was a guy in search of his voice, and almost going way back to the beginning of this conversation, I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to have a voice. And when I first moved here, I realized, well, I'm not being given that opportunity. I'm being given to have a voice if I tell that story or sing that story the way a producer or a record company or whoever, they want it a certain way. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable trying to sing like, I don't even know who would it have been at the time. But
Yeah.
realizing at some point, even a bold person like me had a difficult time finding his place to tell a story. I finally had to determine, well, damn it, I'm just going to tell I'm going to make my own records. And if a few hundred people
Yeah.
buy the records, well, maybe that's it, and not worrying about
Yeah.
fame or acclaim or anything else. The gift back to me, especially having the songwriter workshop, that just keeps
Mm-hmm.
on giving to me because and really it's a gift of gratification. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
people just love coming to this thing. And I'm always worried every year when
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get people signed up. I'm always thinking, just like a Kickstarter, yesterday was my first day kickstarting, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm always worried that it won't fulfill, but and I sure hope this one does, but you don't know. But meanwhile, I look at the workshop and these dear friends I've made. In fact, when Cindy Morgan and her husband Jonathan Richardson got married, they had met at the workshop when we held it in Hot Springs, North Carolina. When they got married in this teeny little town of Hot Springs, and half the people that were there were Mercyland people. So they had their
Wow.
reception was a bunch of Mercylanders singing songs, and it was just great fun. And what a
Oh, yeah.
tribute to the workshop well, and I actually performed the ceremony, and which was a shock
Oh,
to me, but
nice.
it all was, yeah. I mean, it was just beautiful. My girlfriend Jenny, she read scripture. Steve Hindalong read scriptures. Probably the first time he's read scripture in some time, but that's between us. So anyway, all that to say that I never aspired to creating community. In fact, ironically, Laura Lynn, my father, God rest his soul, greatest man I ever knew, most loving individual I ever knew, he was a pastor and he was fantastic at it. The irony of Mercyland is that in a very real sense, I have found myself in that role of being a gentle, loving
Mhm.
guide to people. And thankfully, it's only for 3 days. Anyway, so that's that. Yeah, Mercyland.
You mentioned it, your Kickstarter started yesterday for these next two albums, for Millionth Mile and for, what's the other one? The other mile? What's the other one?
The other one's called More Miles, and then for the
More
book,
Miles. Okay.
Summer of Gone. So it's
Yeah.
just,
And then for the
yeah,
book.
More
Yeah.
Miles.
So I will, in the show notes, I'll have links for the Kickstarter. But I looked earlier today and you looked, maybe you were at a quarter of your goal, maybe? It just
Yes.
opened
Yep.
yesterday.
So that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And the first day is usually good, but from here on out, I'll still stress about it until I'm done. So,
Oh yeah. Yes. I did one too. And I will never do one again because of the stress and anxiety that it put on,
I
or that
know,
I put on myself.
I know.
um, it takes a lot to do them too. It's a creative process and a learning curve.
Oh, yeah. It's just what you have to do if you're selling records. But I'm not doing this for my book. I'm
Yeah.
trying to help the process with the book. But yeah, the
Yeah.
book's not cheap, as you know.
And we're hoping for your book to be out in October, maybe November of
Yeah,
26.
yeah.
Okay.
That's the
Well, I'll
hope.
see. We'll have to have you back for that after that, and
Yeah.
we can talk more about it and hear some more of the stories that are in there. But you've just been such a pleasure to have on. I knew you would be, and
Well, it has been my honor, and I truly mean that. Of course, I have great affection for
oh,
the Donahues, and it's been a total pleasure. And I'm proud of you that you've all of a sudden, written a book, and you've raised all these kids, and bam, here you are, an author. That's fantastic. So,
well, I appreciate that. I really do. I'm getting to know myself. But thank you again, Phil, and I wish you the best, and I'll talk to you soon, hopefully, and I'll keep up with the
yes,
Kickstarter.
thank you, Laura Lynn. I
Okay, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
All right.
All right. See you.
Okay,
Bye
bye.
bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Story Sessions, where your story matters. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone you know. To learn more about the Story Sessions family, visit storysessions.live. That's storysessions.live. Thanks so much, and see you next week.